In the last section, we saw how the introduction of corn transformed lifeways in the eastern woodlands and led to the emergence of the Mississippian culture. We saw how the surplus production provided by corn provided the foundations for the emergence of social inequality, and in this section we'll see how religion and warfare was used to reinforce chiefly power. When interpreting the burial practices and religious rites of the woodland period, we use some analogies with historic Native American folklores and traditions. And in the Mississippian period, there's an even closer and more direct link, and much of the art can be interpreted within the context of historic Native American traditions. And this is really, I think, a very interesting part of the archaeology of the eastern woodlands, is the ability to make these direct connections with contemporary Native American cultures and their understanding of the past, allowing archaeologists to have better interpretations of the material culture that we find. This is a artwork by a Cherokee named Jack Johnson, and he is using images from Mississippian archaeological artifacts in order to illustrate his understanding of the way the Mississippian cosmos was organized. And this is also inspired by his understanding of Cherokee traditions of how the cosmos was organized, the nature of supernatural beings that resided in the above world, the nature of supernatural beings that resided in the below world, how the upper world and the lower world were connected to the middle world upon which humans lived via a world tree, was the axis mundi, and you can see that in the center of this image. And then how there was the path of souls, shown as the Milky Way sweeping across the bottom, that allowed the souls of the dead, shown as skulls or decapitated heads in the upper right. They followed this path and eventually able to pass through the portal, the hand with the eye within, the eye being the nebula within the constellation that we recognize as the lower half of Orion, but what Native Americans saw as a hand in the sky. And so this direct connection between historic and contemporary Native American cultures, their traditions about the past, allow archaeologists to better understand the material culture that we find. Archaeologists began to try to define this body of artwork as a complex of related ceremonial ideas, and it was called the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex. The artwork seemed to show symbolism related to a separation of the cosmos into an upper world and underworld, and a middle world upon which people lived. And there were upper world supernaturals and underworld supernaturals. And these were animals that were not ordinary animals, not natural animals, but extraordinary, supernatural. They combined the aspects of different powerful animals together into a single beast. They combined panthers, snakes, raptors, and deer together. There are also mythic personages with supernatural attributes, humans that have wings or raptor beaks, taloned feet or hands, and often antlers growing from their head. These are not ordinary people, not natural people, but extraordinary and supernatural. And there are artifacts, there are ritual paraphernalia to allow people to personify these mythic heroes, to become them in ritual performances that are done to benefit the entire community. The ceremonial complex has an emphasis on death, the journey of the soul after death, and the ability to access other dimensions. Some of the art seems to tell a story that we know of from the traditions of the Siouan and Caddoan speakers of the Mississippi Valley and the upper Midwest. It's the story of their culture hero, Redhorn, whose name changes during his lifetime because of his achievements, and he is ultimately known as Morning Star. And in these achievements he defeats death, defeating supernatural giants, cannibals who preyed upon the people. And after defeating these supernatural giants, he brings agriculture to the people with a giantess bride who teaches them how to practice agriculture and how to perform religious rites to create fertility and agricultural bounty. This copper plate from Etowah, Georgia is about 30 centimeters high and appears to be a representation of Redhorn as Morning Star. After he has died, defeated death, been resurrected after he defeats the cannibal giants of the underworld, and here he rises flying out of the underworld as the rising morning star, bearing the head of his vanquished foe. And there is not just representations of Morning Star, there's paraphernalia that allowed individuals to dress and perform as Morning Star and Red Horn in rituals that reenacted these acts of triumph over death, of the bringing of agricultural bounty and fertility. As Morning Star, he is shown as a peregrine falcon. You can see the raptor-like beak. He has wings. He has the markings of a peregrine falcon on his face, the eye surround that goes around and comes down the cheek. And a peregrine falcon is a powerful symbol. These are the fastest birds in the world. They fly high above and hunt other large birds like doves and ducks. They dive upon them from above, going at speeds of up to 160 miles an hour. They are like living bolts of lightning, and they are a powerful symbol that is attached to Morning Star and to Mississippian chiefs and warriors. Informed by the Red Horn Morning Star saga, many of the ritual objects that are found in Mississippian deposits have been reinterpreted and understood as telling this story. This pipe here, you can see the bowl in the head and a hole drilled in the back of the head into which a pipe stem would be inserted, shows Red Horn early in his career when he has begun practicing as a shaman and has the ability to control game. Here he is singing, chanting, shaking a rattle, and holding down a deer that has submitted itself to him. Chunky was a popular game played by Native Americans in the upper Midwest and the Mississippi Valley well into the early historic period. This is a painting by George Catlin done in the 1930s of Indians in South Dakota playing Chunky. In Chunky, a disc is rolled along the ground and two competitors throw spears at it, trying to predict where the disc will end its roll and stop and fall over. There was a lot of wagering upon this, and people would lose their shirt, literally, gambling away their clothes at Chunky games. And Chunky is an important game in understanding the Red Horn myth, because it's through the game of Chunky that Red Horn is transformed into Morning Star. There are these cannibal giants that are terrorizing the people, and Red Horn goes to confront them. He is challenged to a series of Chunky games, which at first he loses, and he is himself decapitated. But through his own force of will, he resurrects, challenges these cannibal giants again, defeats them, defeating death itself, and returning to the earth's surface, bringing with him a giantess bride. Many Chunky stones have been recovered from Mississippian archaeological sites, almost exclusively deposited within mounds and associated with elite burials, because the game is associated with the culture hero, and the chiefs are associated with the culture hero. Ground and polished from very hard river stone, you can imagine that these required a considerable input of labor to produce, and were incredibly valued items. This shell gorget shows Red Horn as a Chunky player preparing to roll the Chunky stone in a competition. Red Horn defeats the giants, beheads them, and returns to the surface with the giants and with their sister, bringing with her agriculture and fertility rites associated with agriculture. In this shell gorget, we see Morning Star rising up from the underworld, bearing a mace in one hand, the decapitated head of his enemy in the other, wearing a special headdress that identifies him, and the eye surround linking him with peregrine falcons. He wears a special shell bead necklace, and at his waist is something that was originally called the bellows, because it looks like a bellows used to start and maintain fires. But Native Americans have provided insight and suggest that this is actually a scalp pouch. It is part of a warrior's accoutrements, just like he would have specialized headdress, body painting, specialized weapons. He also has a pouch that he carries the scalps of his defeated enemies in order to provide him power. When Redhorn returns from the underworld after defeating the cannibal giants and bringing agriculture, he is renamed Morning Star and is associated with the planet Venus, which is both the morning star and the evening star. Venus goes through a cycle where for 263 days it is visible on the eastern horizon just before sunset as the morning star. Then for 50 days it is not visible in the heavens at all, because the Earth has literally turned its back on it, and when we are looking up at the heavens, Venus is on the opposite side of the universe from us. And then for 263 days it shows up as the evening star, visible on the western horizon just after sunset. And then for 8 days it is not visible at all, but this time because it is up in the sky during the day, we can't see it because of the brightness of the Earth. So this cycle of the morning star was seen as its birth, death, and rebirth, and then its death again and rebirth, with cycles of birth, death, and rebirth. And the morning star in Venus is often associated with shamans and with warriors in Native American cultures. When we get to the Mesoamerican area, we'll see how the cycles of Venus were used to schedule conflict between political communities. Redhorn did not return from the underworld alone. He brought with him one of the sisters of the cannibal giants he had defeated, and she brought with her the knowledge of agriculture and ritual practices that were needed to bestow fertility upon the earth. This small statue, the Berger figurine, was found during excavations being done for the interstate that runs by Cahokia. In those excavations, a small temple on top of a mound was found to have been burned and contained this figurine and other ritual objects. It shows a woman using a hoe to cultivate a serpent. And from this serpent that she cultivates grows a vine that reaches up and over her back, and on this vine are squash plants. So it shows her cultivating the metaphorical earth, and from it, squash growing from the earth, up and over her body. Also notice that she carries a pack on her back. Here she holds that pack in front of her. It is a specialized container for medicine bundles. Bundles, wrappings that contain religious objects, holds them, contains them safely within this larger basket. And when they are used, the basket would be opened, the bundles removed, the objects unwrapped as songs and chants and prayers were sung in order to activate these objects prior to their use in communal rituals in order to bring fertility upon the land. In addition to providing knowledge of agriculture, she also provided knowledge of the rituals needed to provide an agricultural bounty. Above we see baskets made by the Chitimacha tribe from Louisiana, and baskets like these were used to contain medicine bundles, and below we see a fragment of a Mississippian basket that was recovered from an archaeological site. You can see how the baskets above are very similar in shape and form to the one shown at the knees of the Keller figurine and carried on the back of the Berger figurine. Cahokia, where many of these red claystone figurines were recovered, appears to be the center of the development of Mississippian ritual symbolism and political ideology. These claystone statues and copper plates appear to have been made almost exclusively at Cahokia. There are workshops for their manufacture, and the claystone has been mineralogically traced to a particular source in southeastern Missouri, just southwest of the Cahokia site. The copper plates are being manufactured from the same copper sources as the earlier woodland period copper objects. So it appears they are being manufactured at Cahokia and then distributed through a network of relationships as ritual and political symbols. The iconography that is found on these claystone statues and the copper plates is then reproduced in the communities that these ideas are spread through exchange. In the southeastern United States, various Muskogean-speaking tribes that are referred to collectively as the Creek had a tradition that the plate bringers brought knowledge of how to control weather and installed themselves as chiefs living on top of the mounds early in their historical traditions, and that these plate bringers had come from the west, perhaps coming from Cahokia or another community between the southeastern United States and Cahokia that had already been influenced by developments in the Cahokia region. Cahokia is a location that's called the America Bottom. It is this large, wide area along the Mississippi River floodplain that provided a very rich environment not just for the practice of agriculture, but also for fishing and collecting wild plants. And it's also at the crossroads, so to speak, of several corridors of north-south and east-west water travel. It is along the Mississippi River and is very close to where the Missouri comes in from the west, and where the Illinois comes in from the northeast, and where the Ohio comes in from the east. And further up the Ohio, there's the Cumberland that branches down and goes into Tennessee, as well as the Tennessee River that goes further south into Alabama. So its location is very advantageous both for the massive productive capacity of the agricultural lands that surround it, and this still is a very productive agricultural region, but also it is very strategically located along routes of transportation that would have allowed it to monitor communications and also be a central node in any exchange networks. Cahokia was established around AD 800, but went through a period of rapid growth between AD 1050 and 1150, when it seems to have emerged as the premier center of the whole Mississippian world. And we will look at a particular burial mound from Cahokia that was first established right at the beginning of this period of growth and used throughout it. During this period, there was also expansion into upland areas that formerly had only been used for gathering, but came to be used for corn farming as well. The woods were cleared, and corn was planted in these upland areas in order to further increase the production of this staple of the Mississippian subsistence economy. And into this expansion, populations from the bottomlands seem to have been relocated in organized communities. You have fairly standardized sized communities established up in the uplands that also follow a kind of standardized village layout, divided into quarters with a plaza in the center and a ceremonial pole in the center of the plaza. Cahokia went through a slow decline after AD 1250 and was abandoned after AD 1300. There was a severe period of drought that swept across the entire North American continent during this period. You may know it from the American Southwest, where the terminal part of this drought led to the abandonment of the Four Corners region. And it's possible that this drought also led to a transformation of Mississippian economies, an abandonment of many of the large centers during this period, and a reorganization into smaller communities. While Cahokia was abandoned as an active settlement, people continued to return to Cahokia and inter their dead within the mounds into the historic period. And early historic period Native American burials have been found in the upper parts of many of these mounds, that people continued to return to these sites, seeing them as tied to their ancestors and placing the remains of their ancestors within them as well. Here's some examples of the claystone statues and copper plates that appear to have been manufactured at Cahokia. On the left, we see Redhorn as a chunky player down in the underworld competing against the cannibal giants, and X-ray refraction has been used on these to confirm that ones that have been found as far away as Oklahoma and Alabama were actually manufacturing material that was excavated out of a quarry less than 25 miles from Cahokia. And at Cahokia there are workshops, places with abundant debris, and the specialized tools that were used to cut, shape, and polish the stone and manufacture these pipes. There are also workshops for the manufacture of these copper plates, with debris from their manufacture, small pieces of copper that have been cut off in order to shape the plates, specialized punches and other tools that were used to emboss them to manufacture these decorated plates. And this evidence seems to be almost exclusive to Cahokia, as though it was the center of the production of these ritual objects, and therefore also the place where the ideas associated with them, the types of rituals, and the idea of rulership tied to the persona of Redhorn were institutionalized and then spread through other communities through trade and exchange, possibly intermarriage among elites. Many of these objects go through long use lives before they are actually deposited in the ground where archaeologists recovered them. This one, which was recovered in Missouri, had been damaged during its use. You can see two breaks that had been fixed by riveting it back together over the perhaps 200 years or so of its use life, from when it was manufactured around AD 1050 to 1100 to when it was deposited sometimes after 1250, it was damaged and repaired. And there are several examples of these copper or claystone pipes being repaired or reshaped and repurposed. Some of those that were used as pipes were initially manufactured as pipes. Others were small statues that were later repurposed as pipes. During the Mississippian period, we see evidence of abundant warfare. During the earlier woodland period, there is almost a total absence of warfare. Woodland period people lived in dispersed settlements of small hamlets of 2 to 4 houses that would have been very vulnerable to conflict between communities. Later Mississippian people who are aggregated into larger villages build defensive walls to surround their villages and protect them from their enemies. Apparently that was not a concern of earlier woodland people. We also see no skeletal evidence of interpersonal conflict in woodland period burial assemblages. There are no bodies with embedded projectile points of particular types of bone breaks that can be associated with defensive wounds, holding your arms up to protect your head from blows from clubs or axes. And there are no cranial fractures, particularly in the frontal bone, the front of the head, where people often are beaten with clubs, receiving serious injuries. And we see all of those types of injuries in Mississippian burial assemblages: embedded projectile points, fending wounds, fractures in the crania, suggesting that there was an increase in levels of violence. And not just an increase in violence, this violence is organized and is between different political communities. And it's a very important arena of competition among chiefdoms, as various chiefs try to control larger territories and the populations within them, trying to maintain or perhaps even expand the domain that is under their control. Warfare is embedded with myth and ritual, and was likely seen as the same sort of struggle that Redhorn had against his enemies, the cannibal giants. And it also may have played an important role in providing captives that were used in ritual sacrifices. It also could have been a very important arena for social mobility. Mississippian society was probably highly stratified. And those who were born into chiefly lineages or within the chiefly class had prerogative that those that were not born within those social groups did not have. And the only way of achieving any social mobility and advancing from a lower status into this higher status was likely through warfare, based upon demonstrations of bravery in battle and the fealty that you have towards your chief for whom you are fighting. In addition to the skeletal evidence of violence, these walls, the palisade walls that surround large Mississippian villages, are pretty obvious evidence of a need for defense, and you would not invest the amount of labor and resources in these features if you did not have a clear concern that your community was possibly going to be attacked. So the central precinct of Cahokia was surrounded by this bastioned palisade, meaning that there are towers along it. There are screened entrances there between those two towers that project out from the wall. You can see this other small wall, and you would have to pass behind it and then make a hard left and then another hard left before you had to make a hard right to come out. It would slow down people trying to enter, and any attackers trying to pass through would just be like whack-a-mole to defenders on the inside, because they would be slowed down making these turns. Their progress is bottlenecked by the narrowness of the entryway. And then also between the two towers, it's what's called enfilading fire. Archers on the top would be able to catch anyone trying to attack the wall between the towers in a crossfire. Their walls were made of logs that were set into trenches, upright into trenches that were dug and then lashed together with other poles. And as a final preparation, they were coated with a level of clay that would make them more fire resistant, preventing the enemy from using fire easily as a means of breaching the wall. The palisade surrounding Cahokia was nearly 4 kilometers long. That's about 2.5 miles, and is estimated to have required nearly 100,000 logs. So this is a considerable investment in labor and resources, because not only do you have to dig the trench and set your poles in it, you have to obtain these 100,000 logs, go out and cut them, cut off all the limbs, cut them to the appropriate size, transport them to the site. So this is a considerable investment of labor on the community level, perhaps equal, if not more than, the amount of labor that was invested in the construction of mounds. So what to remember? The mythologies and oral histories of Native American groups in the Southeast, Midwest, and Plains provide insights into Mississippian art and iconography and allow these artifacts to speak to us and tell the stories of the past. There seems to be a great importance of the Red-Horned Morning Star creation saga, and the association of chiefs with this mythic hero as a means of reinforcing their claims to power. It is likely that not only did they claim to... So what to remember? The mythologies and oral histories of Native American groups of the Southeast, Midwest, and Plains provide us insights into Mississippian art and iconography that let these artifacts speak to us and tell the stories of the past and their understanding of the nature of the way the universe worked and the place of humans within it. There seems to be great importance placed on the Red-Horned Morning Star creation saga, and chiefs are associated with this mythic hero, and it's likely that they used a claimed relationship of descent from this culture hero as a basis for their claims to power. I am the chief because I am descended from this nearly God, this very important supernatural being that founded our way of life. Mississippian art, iconography, and the concepts of chiefly power appear to have originated at Cahokia and then spread from there, spreading through exchange, and most likely the exchange not just of the ritual objects and paraphernalia, but the exchange of people that went with them, people moving and intermarrying into the elites within neighboring communities, slowly transmitting these ideas. In some cases, they may have been recruited. I want one of these powerful people to come and join our community, to provide us leadership, guidance, and provide the supernatural powers that they can control to bring us favorable weather and fertility for great agricultural bounty. Warfare was an important arena of political competition among chiefs. Chiefs competed against each other in order to control territory, to maintain their hold over their territory, to expand their domain by defeating neighboring chiefs and incorporating their territory into theirs. And this was made sacred by its association with myth and ritual. So religion and warfare seem to have been important factors that were used to create and maintain social inequality that first emerged because of the increased productivity of corn that fueled population growth that led to aggregation to larger communities where you had greater emergent social differentiation that needed mediation between the groups, and the emergence of a managerial class on top that directed everybody else and then used ritual and warfare to maintain their position at the top. In the next two sections on Mississippian, we will look closely at the reading by John Blitz and Patrick Livingood, who try to answer the question of why are some mounds bigger? And then we will look at one mound in particular, Mound 72 from Cahokia, and look how the burial rituals and rites that were practiced there were used to create and reinforce chiefly power.